What if house elves are descended from goblins? There's a lot of debate in the Harry Potter universe on what is the origin of the house elf. And I think today I have finally figured out what the origin of house elves are. That is what we are talking about today. House elves could be the descendants of goblins, and there's a lot of proof that is given to us throughout the series. Let's go over the timeline of maybe what happened to the goblins to make them split into almost two different races. First, let's talk about what a house elf is. A house elf is a small, about 2 to 3 foot tall, scrawny creature with big ears, big eyes, that lives to serve the wizarding race, usually found within older wizarding families, and can only be freed by being presented clothing. Now let's talk about a goblin. About 2 to 3 feet tall, long pointy ears, not bat-like, but more skinny, small beady eyes, sharp aggressive teeth, has a vendetta against humans, and has magic that wizards want, while goblins want magic that wizards have. Very similar descriptions between the two, slight differences: bulbous eyes rather than beady eyes, big ears rather than skinny ears. But those attributes may explain the evolution from the goblin to the house elf based in the servitude of wizards. So first off, let's talk about a little bit of the brief history of the goblins and the house elf. So things that we know is back in the 10th century, so a little over 1,000 years ago, Hogwarts was founded. Two things are important about the founders of Hogwarts. You have Godric Gryffindor, who went to the king of the goblins and requested the finest sword to be made. And that goblin, he made that sword. He then said to Godric, "You know what? I like this sword too much. I'm not going to give it to you." And Godric said, "I paid for that sword, so it is mine. So I will take it." And the king said, "Of course, we did make a deal. You did give me gold, so I must give you the sword." But then the king said, "That man stole my sword. We have some conflict." And he sent emissaries to Godric Gryffindor to get the sword back. Now Godric, he was a good man. He never attacked the goblins that came to steal the sword back. He did bewitch the goblins to send them back to the Goblin King and say, "You're not getting this sword back. This sword is rightfully mine. You can stop, or we will have issues." Eventually, the Goblin King did give up after multiple times of him trying to steal the sword back. It doesn't say in the history within Pottermore about the Sword of Gryffindor why the king gave up, but eventually the king did. Even though, till his death, he did still say that Godric Gryffindor stole that sword, and then the myth was passed throughout history of goblins, and the goblins did believe that Godric stole the sword. Which then comes into play in Deathly Hallows about, the goblins trying to get the sword back. The other thing we know about the founders is with Helga Hufflepuff. Helga Hufflepuff took in house elves. And you're probably thinking, why did Helga Hufflepuff take in house elves? Why didn't she free them? House elves being taken into Hogwarts is important to the story, so we'll get to that eventually, but be patient. Helga took in house elves to keep them safe. Why did they need to be kept safe? We'll get to that too. We know that goblins had it out for the founders, and Godric, instead of killing them, would bewitch them and send them back to the Goblin King. But then eventually the Goblin King stopped sending emissaries to try to steal back the sword. We don't know why, but we know that it stopped. Then we also know that Helga Hufflepuff built the kitchens, built areas in the school for the house elves to be able to work and cook food without being seen and being safe. This is all important to the story, and we will get into more detail. Now let's talk about some of the finer details of the house elf. House elves don't wear clothes. They usually wear linens that they have found and scrapped together to cover their unmentionables. House elves also feel that it is a disgrace to be set free. We also find that in the canon of the Harry Potter books, we only see 4 house elves. In the Harry Potter ride for Battle of the Ministry, we do meet another house elf, but once again, like I said, in the canon of books, not in the ride. So Dolores Umbridge's house elf that is introduced in the Ministry of Magic Q, I'm not using her as an example of this argument because she may or may not be canon, because we only see her in the ride and that's it, and we don't know anything about her other than that. So we see 4 house elves. And that's not a lot. We do hear that fair and far between, mostly found in old wizarding families. The funny thing about it, though, is 3 of the 4 that we see are found within families that are part of the Sacred 28. The Black family, the Malfoy family, and the Crouch family. Is that part of it? No, but it's kind of suspicious that the only 3 that we find are 3 of the oldest pure-blood wizarding families, and we don't see other house elves. The only other house elf we see is Hoki, the house elf, who is the house elf to Hepzibah Smith. That's important too. Because remember, let's go back to Helga Hufflepuff, who made a sanctuary for house elves. Who is Hepzibah Smith related to? The one person that we find out is Helga Hufflepuff. Hepzibah Smith is a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff, so it makes sense for Helga's lineage to have house elves. It's interesting that a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff would have house elves, but maybe Helga had a house elf who she took care of, but with family descendants over 1,000 years, you know, probably the whole idea of, hey, we take care of house elves eventually kind of disappears, and, you know, you get Hepzibah Smith, who doesn't mistreat Hoki, but doesn't exactly treat her well. So you have 4 house elves. All 4 of them are ancient wizarding families, 3 of them part of the Sacred 28, one of them part of the founding members of Hogwarts. We don't know who else has house elves. We don't see them. We don't hear about them. But the mark of a good house elf is not seeing the house elf. So back to the clothing. House elves don't wear clothes. They wear linens that cover up their initials. As I said before, the only way to free a house elf is to present it with clothing. It's peculiar that one of the things that you would want a house elf to do is clean your clothes. Granted, wizards can just use magic to scourgify their clothes, so it's probably not as important to have their clothes cleaned by a house elf, and the house elf isn't going to hand wash clothes. A house elf will probably, your clothes are clean, they're hung up, your shoes are polished. Probably something like that. Doesn't actually need to be like physically washed in a washing board or something of that sort. Why is it important that clothes are given to house elves to free them? Well, what is the difference between wizards and house elves? Wizards wear clothes, house elves don't. Being able to present clothing to a house elf would basically say, I see you as an equal. You cannot be a slave any longer. So I'm going to present you with clothes. You are now free. You are equal to me being able to wear clothes. What separates humans from animals? We wear clothes. We also have a creative imagination, but that is beside the point. We wear clothes, animals don't. When we see animals in clothes, we anthropomorphize them and, you know, they're cute. They're like little humans. So house elves get clothes, seen as equals. They're free. Why is that important, though? Well, you got to think, maybe back when house elves first became house elves and came into the servitude of humans, that was the deal, is they were being punished. Punished for what? We'll get to that. But they were being punished, made to be taught a lesson. And once humans saw that hey, you know what? We'll make up to it. You'll be free. We'll give you clothes. You are an equal. Sounds great. But now you're probably saying, but house elves don't want to be free. They see being presented clothes as being failures, as you have failed your master. Why did she take in house elves to work for Hogwarts, but not free them if she had a problem with how they were being treated? Because that's the thing, she took them in because they were being mistreated. She was trying to build a sanctuary in Hogwarts for house elves to be safe. Safe from what? Safe from being murdered once they were freed. There's a reason the Sacred 28 are the ones that had the house elves. The Sacred 28 are the main families of the wizarding world who are ancient almost. They are the names that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. A lot of them have died out or have interbred and lost their names, say the Peverils or the Crouches. What if these Sacred 28, the families that still have it, there were multiple families that fought against this goblin rebellion of some sort, and one making the deal where the goblins had to pay reparations for the death of wizarding family members. Each wizarding family was tasked to take in one of these goblins by contract to serve for that family till the family saw that the debt that goblin had brought was repaid. Because goblins do have a sense of morality when it comes to debts being repaid. So of course a goblin would probably be like, yes, I did wrong. I must repay my debt. We see that with Ludo Bagman, where he pays the goblins in fool's gold, and then they hunt him down and most likely kill him because a debt was needed to be paid. So if you are going to betray us, we are going to kill you. And goblins are a little bit vicious like that, but still, goblins have a very black and white sense of debt and repayment. We see that with Griphook as well. With the sword, does not belong to humans. It is required to go back to the creator on the death of that human or the descendants, because you paid for it, you own it, no one else does, so it must be repaid. And if you want to keep it in your lineage, you do have to repay the goblin every time it is passed down. So of course the goblins are going to probably get into this servitude thinking, yes, the wizards will set us free fairly shortly once we repay our debts. Well, magical binding contracts are pretty hard to break. We do see it a lot with the Goblet of Fire and the Unbreakable Vow. There's other like unmentioned bonds that happen. You have the repayment between Harry saving Peter Pettigrew's life, and eventually he feels required to save Harry, which then causes Peter Pettigrew to die himself. You also see where Harry tells Dobby, don't go saving my life, and when Dobby finally does actually save Harry's life, he ends up dying. So life debts and vows and promises are very strong magically and are pretty much unbreakable. So of course the goblins cannot just be freed. It's, hey, in the contract, the goblins have to serve the wizards until the wizards present them with clothes, signifying that you are our equal. It is fair. You have repaid your debt. The wizards, of course, probably feared that, hey, if we set these goblins free, they will turn around and kill us. A couple wizarding families probably were like, hey, look, I feel weird having these goblin slaves, so I'm going to just set them free. Here, have some clothes. You're free. Cool. The goblin is free. Next morning, goblin found dead in streets because other wizards were like, we don't want to free the goblins. And maybe some of the goblins that were freed did attack their muggle families. Hey, I'm free now. Cool. I'm going to kill you. The wizards could have been in the right for some sake, but there were some that were just like, hey, listen, I'm free. I want to go back. We're good. Please don't kill me. So of course, a lot of families were like, I don't want to set them free because number one, they may kill me. Number two, they may get killed themselves, and I would feel bad about that. So this is where Helga Hufflepuff comes in, and she takes in these goblins from these families that just are like, hey, we don't want this. And there were still some wizarding families who probably lost family members who were just like, no, I'm going to keep this goblin. This goblin killed members of my family and friends, so we're going to keep them. And so you have the house elves that live in Hogwarts, and then you have the house elves that stay with the Sacred 28 families, usually in the families of the more morally gray area of good or evil. You have the Blacks, mostly evil. You have the Malfoys, mostly evil. You have the Crouches, who are morally gray, good or evil. And then you have Helga Hufflepuff, who, she's good, but, probably her family throughout the generations became morally gray. Hepzibah Smith isn't exactly a good person. All in all, the house elves who did get freed were killed, so people who wanted to free the house elves but wanted them to live gave them to Helga Hufflepuff to put into Hogwarts to keep them safe from other wizards, and eventually probably supposed to be freed. Time goes on, things get lost, the idea kind of disappears, and eventually house elves don't want to be freed. So why would house elves not want to be freed? Well, of course they would probably see, anytime we get freed, we're killed. So of course we don't want to be freed, we will stay here. They eventually start to breed, maybe not breeding with goblins, because actual goblins probably look at them and go, you are servants to humans? Get away from me, you make me sick, you filthy animal. So of course they're going to interbreed with the goblins who are also house elves. Then probably down the road, the Sacred 28 families usually try to find breeding stock and find the best. Hey, my house elf is actually really good at knowing what I need, and all I have to do is whisper. I say, I wish I had a drink. And then here comes my house elf with a drink. I don't even have to ask the house elf. Well, my house elf can find the smallest bit of dirt in any corner, even if it is the darkest corner there is. Well, these attributes, the big ears, the big eyes, they end up getting bred into the creatures. And the house elves who hear the best have the bigger ears. So eventually, after time, the goblin ears that start like this end up becoming more bat-like, more sonar-driven. They can hear the smallest mess. in their eyes, their little beady eyes that are used to seeing little tiny coins and fine details within the goblin forges, eventually start to become bigger, to be able to spot dirt from all around, be able to see everything, be able to understand everything that's going on, take in more information so they can better help their owners. And eventually the house elves don't look like goblins anymore. They become their own creatures. Over 1,000 years, this could happen. And of course, Newt's commander is at the end of that 1,000 years, and it's probably not one of those things that people talk about that, oh yes, house elves, they used to be goblins, but now they are house elves. No, it's wrong. Like, yeah, I don't know where house elves come from. Just, rich old families seem to have them. They seem to come with the houses sometimes, but we don't really learn what happens to house elves. And even Hermione's like, there's no history to these house elves. Like, where did they come from? Why do they have to serve humans? It's just, they're there. Well, maybe they wanted to cover up where these house elves came from. Of course, the Sacred 28, the more darker families who are pro-wizard and no, we don't interbreed with these muggles or muggleborns. Maybe we should not tell anybody. Let's delete the history of where the house elves came from. So then we don't have to lose our house elves. All right, so the house elves came from goblins, but why? Why did the house elves get into servitude? Well, one of the biggest things we hear in Harry Potter, in general, just the wizarding world, is the goblin rebellions. There's constantly goblin rebellions. But we also know that the Sword of Gryffindor was created during a contentious time between wizards and goblins, because Godric Gryffindor stole the Goblin King's sword, which was actually bought, but the Goblin King eventually just stopped sending people to try to steal the sword from Gryffindor. Gryffindor didn't want to hurt the goblins. So maybe during this time, a group of goblins tried to rebel against the wizards because, hey, we want our rights. We don't want to be treated. We want our stuff. Stop stealing our stuff. Not realizing that the king was spreading false rumors about, these wizards, they come in and they steal all our stuff. So, of course, the propaganda from the goblins is that the wizards are bad and goblins start rebelling. Eventually, there's some sort of kerfuffle, and the goblins who are part of this group who have rebelled, who started this rebellion, maybe Godric Gryffindor is like, listen, maybe you need to learn a lesson. Put them to serve the wizards, to try to maybe create a bridge between wizards and goblins, and be like, listen, you can live in the life of a wizard. And once that wizard sees you as an equal, they will give you clothes and set you free. And maybe the bond between goblin and wizard will be closer, and they will treat you better, and we will have less rebellions. Unfortunately, the wizards are just as evil as the goblins. So, of course, there are wizard families who are like, you know what? I like having these free servants. They do everything I ask. Why would I give them back? The founders of Hogwarts eventually all die out or disappear. We're not really sure what happens to some of them. Eventually, the history is erased, and we eventually get house elves. So, that's it. So, let's go over a quick summary of house elf history. During a goblin rebellion about 1,000 years ago, because things happen, there's tension between goblins and wizards. The outcome is the wizards win against the goblin rebellion, but instead of just letting the goblin rebellion go back to their homes, they're contracted to repay the damages that they brought, being that they killed a lot of wizards, they ransacked a lot of towns. Cool. You have to serve a wizarding family until they set you free. This was not supposed to be a long-term agreement. It was mostly supposed to be, hey, let the wizards learn who you are, see that you're not all bad, and let the goblins see, hey, look, wizards aren't all that bad. And once they see each other as equals, the wizards will present the goblin with clothes and the goblin will be set free. Unfortunately, the wizards would see some of the goblins be set free. Some of them would be violent, some of them would not be, because not all of the goblins are violent. Not everybody's bad. The goblins would kill their wizarding family after being set free because the wizarding family was like, hey, listen, I feel bad for you. I don't want you to have to serve me. I feel weird about it, so let me set you free. Then the goblin would go, I'm gonna kill you. Or, they would be set free. They would be like, cool, well, I'm happy, you're happy, I'm gonna go on my way. And then other wizards would be like, ooh, we gotta kill that goblin before it kills somebody else. They kill the goblin, so then goblins become afraid to be set free. Wizards who don't want to have these goblin slaves are afraid of setting their goblins free, afraid of being either murdered themselves or the goblin that they have grown attached to being killed. So Helga Hufflepuff takes it upon herself to say, hey, why don't I take in those who do not want their house elves, or at the time, goblins, and they can come and work in the Hogwarts kitchens until this tension between the goblins and the wizards kind of subsides, and then we can set everybody free and they'll live happily ever after. Well, the wizarding families who are part of the Sacred 28, some of them usually in the morally darker side, decide, you know what? We want to keep our free servants because it's awesome. I don't have to shine my shoes anymore. They do it for us. So, of course, what they do is they kind of erase the history. The founders die. It's easier to erase the history. Let's keep it secret that they're goblins. They start to interbreed the best species of these goblins until they become what we know as house elves: big ears, big eyes, and afraid of being set free because they don't know why. They think if you're set free, you're a disgrace. You've disgraced your honor. And probably orders of, hey, I want you to like serving us. And, eventually it brainwashes them into becoming the house elves, the subservient race that they are. But of course, you do have some people like Dobby who does whatever he wants. So that's it. House elves are goblins that were tricked into becoming slaves to wizards, and wizards took advantage of it, eventually them turning into what we know as house elves. So Hermione is right to probably try to set them free. Wizards are wrong to be having them. But at this point, goblins and house elves are so different that they have become their own creatures. In the end, that is the dark history of where house elves came from. So, as always, stay marvelous and Nox.